Okay, good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. My name is Pamidzai Bamu, and I am the African Labour Law Society's president. And I'm here to just welcome you and thank you for joining this webinar, which we hope will really be thought-provoking and which will enable us to engage on something that's very topical at this time. Just for those that do not know the African Labour Law Society, this is a society that was founded really with the objective of bringing African labor lawyers together to engage and to have debates. For those of you that join in on the international labor law conferences and in the international labor law societies, you would know that the voice of the European labor lawyers, the American labor lawyers are very prominent. And as Africans, we didn't have much of a voice. We didn't have that much in terms of rapport to be able to stand together and to say something about labor law in Africa. So really this, through the initiative of the ILO and with the support of the South African Labour Law Society, was a dream that was born. And, 7 years down the line, we are here. And we're really proud of our society and glad to have people from many over 20 African countries as members. So for those that may not be members, we invite and welcome you. I think Claire can share a link to the society, and it would be good for us to engage. We have started having webinars really to get together and to talk about topical issues. Our main event has been the African Labour Law Society conference, but taking advantage of what is happening online, we thought, let's have webinars to come together and to engage on topical issues. And this is why we're having this webinar today. I will not be moderating it. I'm going to hand over to our moderator shortly. Her name is Rethabile Sakoane. She is based in Lesotho. She's an advocate there and a consultant who works a lot on labor law issues. And she's also the president of the Lesotho Labor Law Society. So currently we have the Lesotho Labor Law Society in addition to the South African Labor Law Society and the Kenyan Labor Law Association. And we're hoping to support the birth of additional labor law societies in Africa. This topic that we are going to talk about today, which really is about how the digital landscape is changing collective bargaining in the world of work, is something that we're going to be discussing in our conference that is happening on the 29th and the 30th of March in Mauritius. But leading up to that, we just thought, let's get together and let's have a bit of a debate with our speaker, who is based in South Africa, has load shedding, but hopefully will be able to speak. So at this stage, I will just thank you for being here and encourage you to share with other members. Claire will close this webinar with a brief note about the conference, so be sure to stay tuned. Thank you very much, and over to you, Rethabile, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Bamu. Good to see you again after so long. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's webinar. As Dr. Bamu has already said, this is going to be a first of a series of at least 3 webinars that would like to put in place before the conference, just as part of the momentum to the conference. So we will invite you to the others that will be coming in. But today we would like to go straight into our topic for today. We have in our midst Mr. Mayenzeke Mhlasafika Chiya. I needed to say that. Mayenzeke. Mr. Chiya is a South African from South Africa, from KwaZulu-Natal. And he holds a Bachelor of Laws and Masters of Law from the University of Zululand in South Africa. And he's currently reading towards her LLD in Constitutional and Administrative Law, and also still in the University of Zululand. Now, he says he regards himself as a motivated, adaptable, and responsible individual. He is passionate about labor law, aspires to build a career in academics, and to contribute to the production of the body of knowledge. In addition, he regards himself as an activist. He has led in various positions in student representative councils in the University of Zululand. And he also served as a National Executive Committee member of the Black Lawyers Association, the student chapter. Lastly, he describes himself as a passionate political activist. Wow. Yeah, that's very rich, and thank you very much for agreeing to present in this webinar. I think without much further ado, I'm going to ask Mayenzeke to jump in and start the presentation on adapt and innovate, digitalizing the collective bargaining process. Thank you.
Now, my presentation would seek to engage on the impact of digitalization in the collective bargaining. Now, to begin this discussion, I would in a few minutes start off by laying a background in terms of what constitutes collective bargaining. Then I would lay a background of what were the issues that were present before the digitalization of the workplace, and to actually look at what are the positives that we can get out of it, and what is it that both employers and employees can try to develop in order to have a good workplace. Now, collective bargaining, it's a concept that has been there since 1980. It was created by Webb. Now, they define it as a crucial technique to regulate the working relationship between employees and employers. This comes because in order for the workplace to be functional, there has to be a mutual relationship between the employer and the employee. Now, at the heart of the collective bargaining, it serves to maintain the right to freedom of association. And in other words, collective bargaining and freedom of association, they work together. You can't exercise the other without actually introducing the other. The whole purpose of collective bargaining is to improve the working conditions, both on the side of an employer and on the side of the employee. Now, what is very important is that in such consultation or discussions, there has to be an element of bargaining in good faith, productive collective bargaining. Now we can go to the next slide. Now, as mentioned earlier, the scope is not only limited to working conditions. This can also include working hours, wages, disputes, and all of things that has to do with the workplace. Now, another element that we can pick from collective bargaining is that the parties to collective bargaining, they do it voluntarily. They are not forced to enter into a bargaining process. And that process is not imposed to them. This comes then to my next point, that when the collective bargaining process is happening, out of it is what is born out of it is the collective bargaining agreements. And collective agreements in their nature are binding, and they apply to all workers in the workplace. we can go to the next slide, because I'm trying to at least not spend much time on. Now, the concept of collective bargaining comes from, if you look at it and or you zoom deeper, it comes from the International Labour Organization, which really serves as the custodian of collective bargaining. Now, there are many recommendations and declarations that the ILO has passed in terms of strengthening and making sure that it protects workers' rights and employees' rights in terms of the bargaining process. Another thing that we can take out of it is that collective bargaining requires, on the other side, that you have a very strong trade union. And on the other side, you must have a very strong and willing employer to engage workers in that process. Now, but we can pick that there are issues with regards to the collective bargaining model, that some scholars, they feel that the model is dysfunctional and outdated. But I would go on this debate as I proceed with my discussion. We can go to the next slide. Now, as mentioned earlier, that collective bargaining, ILO is seen as the custodian of this. There are many declarations that are there to give effect to this right. And the International Labour Organization is mandated to formulate international labor standards, setting minimum standards on the basic labor rights and freedoms, and freedom of association and right to organize. Now, the International Labour Organization defines collective bargaining as a voluntary negotiation between an employer and an employee. A number of principles around collective bargaining are born out of this organization. There are many, in terms, if you look at in Africa, there are many constitutions that are as a result of many declarations and conventions. Now, I would mention just a few in terms of the conventions. There is a 1944 declaration on Philadelphia, which actually forms part of the constitution that promotes and give effect to the right to collective bargaining. There is also the tripartite declaration principle concerning multinational enterprise and social policy. This declaration serves as a guideline to the right to freedom of association. Then lastly, there is a declaration on fundamental principles and right at work. Now, this then gives effect to the right to freedom of association. It eliminates forced labor, it eliminates forced child labor, it eliminates even discrimination in the workplace. So what, in a sense, International Labour Organization does, it gives a framework or a base that many member states or countries can draw their constitution from the declarations. And it is worth noting that it is only conventions that are legally binding, but the recommendations are non-binding guidelines. But they serve as guidelines so that when countries formulate their own legislation, they can use it. We can go to the next slide. Now that we've given an understanding of what are issues that are there in terms of layoff to be addressed. One of this is that there is no clear formality governing the conduct on how collective bargaining processes are conducted and the outcomes that are to be expected out of this negotiation. And it is that out of not having a clear guidelines, parties to that bargaining process, they get to choose what to discuss and how long to discuss. And another issue that we find from the literature in terms of collective bargaining is that there is a model that trade unions in the main are using. They're using a possessionalist and confrontational model. What this model says, it then says unions would come with many demands and they would not want to back down for the sake of just holding their position. And on the other side, we find employers not willing to meet each other halfway in terms of the collective bargaining process. So these are part of the problems that are there in the collective bargaining model. And another is that from the literature, it is evident that another thing that is affecting collective bargaining, particularly in Africa, is that parties to collective bargaining are bargaining in bad faith. They are not open and honest in terms of the process. And another point is that there has been a defiance in terms, particularly on the side of trade unions, in terms of compliance with collective bargaining agreements. And even employers, sometimes they don't fulfill the agreement. And when they don't fulfill the agreement, it then takes away the importance of having collective bargaining in the workplace. We can go to the next slide. Now it comes to the center of this discussion, the introduction of digitization in the workplace. Now this concept is not new in the workplace because the International Labour Organization, as early as 2018, it had a commission which then highlighted that increased digitalization and automation is expected to significantly affect both quality and quantity of jobs. Now, this has been there, and because workplace is not in isolation, if you look at the society at large, there has been a rapid change in terms of the introduction of technology as part of our lives. You have your third, now people are speaking about the fourth industrial revolution. Some are even including the fifth industrial revolution. So it was bound that even in the workplace, we're going to experience that. And introduction of digital systems, they bring about change in the workplace. Now, this then calls for employers and employees to roll up their sleeves and prepare for the future so that they don't encounter problems. If there are problems, they're able to mitigate problems in terms so that the collective bargaining process is not affected. No, we can go to the next slide. Now, the introduction of digital model in the workplace, particularly in the context of collective bargaining, it has its own dangers. One of the dangers is that the use of digital system in the main involves outsourcing of that process. And with outsourcing, there is an increased risk of public authority looking into, there is an increased risk such that there's data collection, there's data collection that gets exposed to other external bodies. And also, in terms of this, from the perspective of users and citizens, however, the process can also be problematic if there are inadequate provisions to ensure data security. Now, the use of digital models like civilian monitoring cameras and all of that, it has a potential of exposing workers' privacy and data to potential hackers. Now, the other thing is that there is a health and safety risk to this as part of the dangers. Now, in what sense? When this introduction of digital models in the workplace are happening, workers they begin to be stressed from the perspective that they're going to lose their jobs. There is job uncertainty and all of that. And as mentioned earlier, surveillance cameras, there is exposure to data in terms of being exposed to hackers. And another thing is that there is a loss of personal touch. You would know that historically, collective bargaining in their own nature, they are face-to-face, that has that face-to-face or personal touch. Now, there is some sort of a discomfort from the side of trade unions in terms of using that digitalization in the workplace. But out of it, there are opportunities that we can pick. Like one, this has a potential to increase workplace health and safety because digital technologies, they lower physical danger. Another one is that it has a potential to enhance intellectual duties, to offer chances to people to upskill and reskill. And the other one is that it establishes an environment that influences how work is, remote work is done. People are now no longer forced to go to work. People are no longer forced to go to bargaining meetings in their employer's office. They can be there at home. So those are part of the opportunities that are there that I think we ought to utilize them. We can go to the next slide. Now, from the previous slide is that what you can pick is that the process of introduction of digital models were already in place. And now what COVID-19 did, it accelerated the pace of it being introduced to the workplace. Now, as you all know that COVID-19, there were certain measures that the governments did in order to try and curb the spread of the virus. One of it was to enforce strict lockdown. This then impacted workers that some, they lost jobs. Even on the side of employers, they lost in terms of income. Now people were introduced to the idea of working at home. Now, the out of it from the literature is that the lockdown had a negative impact in the collective bargaining process. In what sense? Is that when lockdown was introduced, particularly in South Africa, for an example, is that most bargaining systems were, or bargaining, collective bargaining systems were suspended or postponed. And now some of the collective bargaining agreements were deferred, some were reviewed, some were not fulfilled. So these were the part of the things that caused the problem in terms of trade unions' capacity. And workers lost lives, lost their jobs. And when they lost their jobs, it meant that trade unions were losing members. And when they were losing members, now they were losing their bargaining power in the process. This is why we saw a decline in terms of union membership and strength. This is why you saw a decline in terms of strikes, in terms of participation in that regard. We can go to the next slide. Now, as mentioned, COVID-19 added to the already existing difficulties that were there in the bargaining, collective bargaining system, particularly that the system was dysfunctional, that there were high a number of cases where people were bargaining in bad faith. Trade unions had trouble in terms of organizing their members and holding their meetings due to their limited internet connectivity. Now, there were two main issues that were found to be a problem in terms of this using digital model in the collective bargaining during COVID-19. One of which was affordability. The cost of data in Africa in the main, and South Africa particularly, it's very high. This is in most cases, a 1 gigabyte costs about $1, which is but too many or too much in terms of cost. And the other part was connectivity, which seemed to be a problem on trade unions. Now, connectivity, it's easy. We had tried, I just had load shedding and I was trying to connect, it was giving me problems. So these were parts of the things that in Africa, some countries really experience in terms of connectivity issues. They experience problems. So this then seemed to be a problem during the bargaining process because workers could not attend this bargaining process or meetings because of affordability, and also on connectivity. And why am I emphasizing affordability? It's because trade unions' survival, they rely on membership. And once they've lost or lose membership, they then lose their financial capacity. And as such, it would be impossible to afford. Now, this is because collective bargaining, they include lengthy and long conversational consultations. And in the process, the collective bargaining was exposed to potential data hackers or dangers to data and privacy. And another thing that was evident from literature was that employers seemed to take an advantage of this process because it was them who would set up a meeting. So they would unmute and mute as they wish in order to influence the outcomes of the bargaining process. We can go to the next slide. Now, COVID-19, what it did, it exposed the collective bargaining model. And it also exposed that out of introduction of this digital model, there are areas that would call them gray areas that need a proper development and proper guidelines or frameworks in order to protect and fulfill the right to freedom of association and the freedom to collective bargaining. Now, out of this literature, there were two things that or two areas that in terms of the recommendations or the findings of the study that I found. They were on the side that were specifically for trade unions and the other side for specifically employers. And on the side of trade unions, there is an urgent need that trade unions should recognize that information technology plays a significant role in determining their continued relevance. Now, if trade unions are ignorant of the digital change, they would lose their relevance. And another point or recommendation is that there is a need for trade unions to ensure that provisions for digitalization and technology diffusions are integrated in the collective bargaining agreements. and in workplace social dialogue structures such as workers' committee and work. What we experienced from the literature was that in terms of collective bargaining, there were very few that dealt with the aspect of introduction of digital model in the workplace. So this then they need to have or revisit their collective bargaining agreements to include so that in the near future, this does not impact negatively the collective bargaining process. And again, trade unions need to take ownership in terms of organizing and setting up of visual meetings, particularly on collective bargaining and workers' education. Now that this problem was identified that employers could mute and unmute as they wished, now trade union must take it to their own hands to try and initiate the process. And again, trade unions need to push for policies that entrench a flexible work culture where workers are encouraged to freely choose where to work. We can't really say remote working is bad. There are positives that we can take. And this then calls for trade unions to try and infuse in their collective bargaining agreements, to infuse where some employers can choose to work from home or work in the workplace, depending on the work demands. There is also a need to strengthen the capacity of employers and trade unions to negotiate effectively. Because what happens then, or what was evident in the literature, is that is willing to sacrifice, no one is willing to back down and come to terms. So we need to have a process where we strengthen the capacity to have effective negotiations. We can go to the next slide. Now, on the side of the employer, the paper recommends that employer using collective bargaining that we can use collective bargaining and social dialogue to develop framework for the introduction of digital models, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And also to develop a model of collective bargaining and training schemes to support trade unions' capacity at all levels so that no one is seen left behind, particularly the elder or the people that have no experience or no in the usage of technological devices. Also, production of digital models in the workplace. Employers need to encourage constructive, meaningful, and informed negotiations. This then influences the bargaining model, that the bargaining model is outdated and it needs to be changed. We can go to, that there must be a mutual trust that guides the collective bargaining process in order to arrive at good agreements, and that the agreements be effective enough. You can go to the next slide. Now, to try and sum up what I was presenting about is that the introduction of digital models was bound to happen, whether COVID-19 was here or not. It was something that the wheels were already in motion. But what the trade unions needed to do, and employers, they
think we may have lost Mayenzeke's sound, unless it's just on my side. Rethabile, can you hear him? I think we got to the last slide though, which is very
sorry
convenient.
about that. I had a small issue.
Oh, he's back.
Great.
I was actually going to say I can. Okay. Good, that is
Yes.
back. All right.
Okay. Now I was saying that in South Africa, because I'm now concluding, in South Africa, in terms of the Labor Relations Act, employers are empowered to retrench workers using this operational. If they are faced with a financial crisis, they can introduce that. But out of it, we need to find in our collective bargaining process, we need to ask ourselves a question of, if company A has been making returns or profits for the past 20 years and experiences a financial crisis for just 1 year or 2, is it safe and honest to say that we allow a process of retrenchments without the consultation of trade unions? Also, trade unions need to push in their collective bargaining process for a platform where they make it a bit expensive for employers to use that approach of retrenchment. In what sense? That they can try and push for, if people are going to be retrenched, at least provide maybe a 6 months or 8 month educational program or support for them, so that they're able to have to generate another income or increase their chances of being employed. Now, out of these problems that we've seen, is that there are parts in terms of Africa, of countries where we see there's International Labour Organization conventions that are binding, but you find that in terms of their consecutions, they are not really living up to the directives of these conventions, such that they seem to be in other countries a platform where collective bargaining systems are not that effective. This then it comes to the conclusion that the collective bargaining is model or system is dysfunctional. Therefore, there is need to introduce a new model, and this model would be an interest-based bargaining model. Now, what does this mean? It then means, above all, we have to put the interest above everything. Unlike in this model that people are using, the positionalist and confrontational, that we need to introduce interest-based bargaining models, so that we look at the interest. In that way, trade unions and employers are able to come together and have good and effective collective bargaining. Another one is that the interest-based negotiation model is really based on win-win principle, that workers are going to win something, employers are going to win something, unlike this confrontational model that we are currently using. Another thing that we concluded from this paper is that there has to be a cooperation between the parties, employers and employees, in a sense that when there is an agreement, there is a need. Whether the agreement binds trade unions must play their part to the end. Likewise, employers must play their part as well. So there has to be a cooperation, so that the collective bargaining process is effective. And once the collective bargaining process is effective, workers are going to enjoy their good working conditions. And on the side, the employer is going to enjoy profits and all of that. Another thing that needs to be introduced is that if you look at the bargaining model and what has been happening in collective bargaining, is that people are really bargaining in bad faith. Now, we need to have a framework that enforces bargaining in good faith. Maybe we can introduce maybe penalties that if trade unions are found to be bargaining in bad faith in one area, you'd have a certain penalty and all of that. But there has to be a framework that is developed. And another one is that you need to have constructive and positive participation of parties. Now, they must engage in this collective aim of coming with positive, not really one-sided. So in that way, now the collective bargaining process would be very, very, very easy in terms of our system. I think I would just end there so that I'm not that long, but it's a really wild paper, but I tried to quantify it to collective bargaining. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mayenzeke. I hope I'm audible. Very unfortunately, I'm also experiencing load shedding, but now I'm connected to my cell phone. I hope I'm audible. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all thank Mayenzeke for a good presentation. We are going to share the slides to everyone who registered for this webinar. So you'll be able to go through the slides yourselves. I don't know whether he's going to present this paper in the conference. I hope so. It's a topic that I'm very much interested in. So yeah, we'll keep in touch. But I think just in summary, I noted that you are very positive in terms of the process of collective bargaining, and I could sense that you are in support of collective bargaining as a continuing process that should still be maintained. However, it is necessary that both trade unions and employers are aware of the changing dynamics in the world, and we have to consider that digitization is the way to go now. COVID-19 has been a sign of things are changing, and therefore we need to change. I'm going to allow participants to pose questions if they have any comments or any contribution that they may have to the presentation. And while we wait, please feel free to put up your question in the chat, but you are also free to ask the question physically. Now, I also just wanted to find out from you, Mayenzeke, I think this may be of interest to participants in Lesotho, the right to strike as an essential element to the concept of freedom of association and the processes of collective bargaining. Do you think it is something that has to be protected, that has to be maintained? Is it really that important as part of the process? Because a lot of countries have limited the right to freedom of association simply because they are worried about the imminent end result of collective bargaining, which is the right to strike. What would be your attitude or your reaction to that? So that I'm asking this question because we have public officers who have set up their own associations here because they're not allowed to form trade unions. And obviously, with an association, the right to strike has been limited. So they have been asking whether that is not infringement of their constitutional right to freedom of association, and that the right to strike comes as part and parcel of the freedom of association. Maybe we can start there and we'll continue. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to pose your questions. Thank you. Mayenzeke?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. It's a very interesting point that we were in what the country might lose and what the workers might lose if we were to infringe their rights. And part of my worry if we were to infringe this right is that employees would have a monopoly in terms of dictating what happens in the workplace. It will then take away the idea of having conversation about what is affecting you in the workplace. And also, I think that's the reason why in some countries, I think in Canada, yes, they're using a model that says we look at what are you striking for and the interest around your strike, so that we don't have what some call political strike, just striking for the sake of striking, which is really affecting. Now we need to limit it, yes, but also limit the dominance of employers, because there are two contending ideas here. There is that of a class question, where employers, they see their workplace as their only hope to upward mobility or to have good large salaries and be able to afford. And on the other side, the employer is protecting profit. So we need to have a way to strike balance between the two. That will be my submission.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know whether we have any public officers in here, because I know this is a big issue for them now, because they start feeling that this really is infringement of their right. I was hoping that maybe they would come in and say something. But anyway, I think one of the very important points that you raised here is the issue of limited internet connectivity. When we're talking digitization, which you rightfully said, it's inevitable. We can't afford not to have not to introduce this digitization into collective bargaining processes. However, how many people can afford it? Especially as we know the size of our trade unions, the caliber, and sometimes even just the affordability of data, even with trade unions. I think that is one of the issues that still has to be managed. But what is it that trade unions can do in that sense, in terms of ensuring that we make data affordable for everyone to be able to? This is the fourth industrial revolution, so we should be able to afford data, all of us, isn't it?
I think part of the problems with regards to connectivity and data is that there is poor infrastructure in terms of our towers and all of that. There is poor infrastructure, and on the other side, there is very little willingness from the government side to try and mitigate. I think in South Africa, there was a call for subsidized data, lower data, but you find that there is no willingness from the side of. But what trade unions, I think, should do is that they can try and push for a policy framework. And because this is a long shot, a short would be that out of the membership that is collected, maybe enter into some sort of a bargaining agreement that says, out of our membership, at least add 5 rands or 10 rands, and out of that 5 rands, it contributes towards that as a short-term solution.
This is why it is important. That you mentioned worker education. This is where it becomes important for your members to understand why it is necessary to increase membership. Because now, gone are the days when we're using paper, gone are the days when we sit around a table and negotiate. with t-shirts, you know, the t-shirts that say an injury to one is an injury to all. Those days are gone. We are now we are now negotiating over the internet, and therefore it is important and necessary that we increase membership so that we can afford data. I think these are some of the very important issues that trade unions need to start engaging their members on, and providing that worker education that you promoted. I don't know whether we have any questions, Claire, from the chat.
I can't see any in the chat. Let me just check if anyone's put up their hands. Please don't feel shy. Please, let's have a discussion. It's a very important topic. Or any of your comments on Mayenzeke's presentation. Oh, Maketi has a question. Thanks, Maketi, if you unmute. Sorry,
Maketi, can you pose your question?
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I think this is very, very interesting. And by the way, I am not a lawyer. I'm an economist, very much interested in labor relations and labor industry. I think employers and employees are playing a very vital role in the development of any country, and maintaining a good relationship between the employers and employees, I think, is very important. One thing that I've actually sensed from the presentation is that there's a need for the government to play its role, because it seems that employers and employees, they have some kind of conflicting interests. Employers, they want to maximize the profits. Employees, they want to benefit out of the efforts that they are putting in their workplace. And you need to have the government playing a very critical role, making sure that the employers are not taking an advantage of the employees, because most of the time you'd find that employees are really negotiating from a disadvantaged position, and you need somebody who's going to level the playing field. And if this is possible, the tripartite framework adopted from the ILO, I think is a very good framework, of which the government needs to know their responsibility and commit. And if the government is not committing to that responsibility, I think law societies and other organizations that are watchdogs can take the government to task. Because unless the government is leveling the playing field, the situation between, or the relationship between the employer and the employee will not benefit the employees. That's my take. And I think if the paper can emphasize, maybe I missed it, but I think the paper can, even in addition to this good presentation, try maybe to emphasize and highlight the role of the government in this relationship, so that the tripartite framework is functional. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Kitty. That was a very good point. I don't know why I'm echoing now. But I think that is one of the most important aspects of tripartism, where we expect government to play that role, where it buffers between the employer and the trade union. We are very aware that we have a new government in Lesotho, and we are hoping that they are part of this presentation, so that at least they get to inform themselves about these new debates around collective bargaining, freedom of association, etc. The last point that I wanted to ask, because I know that we had set about an hour, Claire, is it just 1 hour? Because I wanted to find out from you, Mayenzeke, for the people, those proponents of the idea that collective bargaining is outdated, what are they proposing in place of collective bargaining?
Oh, hi. Now, people want I don't know it with my son, but people who want that we move collective bargaining in the process are really raising. Well, we can't just write them off. Part of it they are raising is this political strikes that people are just causing, necessary strikes and all of that. So they are then suggesting a model or a way where, like in Europe, where they enter into agreements, long-lasting agreements that would bind for a very long time. And another way is that they want to move away from this politicization of the collective bargaining.
Okay, I think that's so. Yeah, so basically, it's just moving away from the traditional model, where you have your trade union and the employer sitting together to negotiate either for better working conditions or hours of work, etc., as you mentioned. So they just basically say let's enter into agreements, without necessarily going through the process.
As individuals, let me have my negotiations with my employer. Doing that individualistic approach.
Yeah, that's it's defeating the whole purpose, isn't it, of having a collective labor law.
Yeah, it's taking away the essence of it. Just but okay. There are attempts from even government. For an example, if you look at Botswana, Botswana, what it does is that their collective bargaining model is shifting towards the side of government and employers. The 2011 strike exposed that Botswana's collective bargaining process, it had many problems, and is not really in line with the convention or the declarations from the International Labour Organization, such that the purpose of collective bargaining is lost in the process. So you still find countries like that. You find also, again, there's another debate that says in the collective bargaining process, employers and employees, they would deadlock, then they would lead to a strike. But employers would be very quick to approach the court to get interdicts. Now they use interdicts as a scapegoat or as a platform to run away from engaging with union. So there's also that.
Okay.
That the government and the executive, the judiciary are not leveling the ground enough for consultation. But also there's a need to capacitate. There's a need to capacitate trade unions in terms of how they negotiate, what they negotiate. Because some, they don't really even read the financial reports of the companies. And now when they enter into agreement, come with demands and they're told they can't offer you that. Yeah. So there has to be capacity building in terms of how to negotiate and to know the content of what is happening in the place. It will put trade unions at a better position.
Thank you. In fact, I was actually going to close on that note, Mayenzeke, that if there's one thing that is going to make collective bargaining processes effective, is for the participants, the trade unions, both the trade unions and the employers, to be educated, build the capacity of the negotiators, make them aware of what will be required in the process itself, so that it don't just go there blank without information. You need to prepare. You need to be sure of the position that you want to take and be able to advance it as much as possible with information, without just going in and saying, I demand this. It has to be supported. And that is the mistake that most of the time our parties in negotiations make, that they make blanket demands without giving them support. I have had the opportunity of facilitating wage negotiations, and I have seen the problem of having a trade union that is not really fully equipped, or that is not informed enough and is not able to advance their reasons or their why they demand a certain percentage increase in their wages. So it becomes very difficult, and you see an employer being able now to use those tricks and tactics that we were talking about, where they will go about playing around with the trade union because they know that the trade union is not equipped enough with information to challenge whatever it is that the employer is presenting. Anyway, I think we are at that stage. If there are no further questions, Claire, unfortunately, I can't see my chat, so I'm not able. I'm not sure if there are any questions or if there is any hand up.
No, there's nothing, and I just want if you could just enable sharing of the screen, please, so I can just share my screen. Thank you very much, Mayenzeke. We look very much forward to having you at our 5th conference in Mauritius in March next year, along with Rethabile. We're making lots of plans to get everybody there, but we need the support of the African Labour Law Society. So it would be great if you could all consider attending either physically in Mauritius or at the online. I'm not going to give too much detail, but just to say that the theme of the conference is African Labour Law in a rapidly changing tech era. And we have a lot of interesting presentations that are linked to this theme. It's a very full program. We've been a bit delayed in getting the program finalized, and that's because we've increased the conference timing from 1.5 days to 2 full days. We've got a lot of interesting speakers from all around the world, as well as in Africa, and I will be sharing the program with you in a week or so. We're very grateful to the sponsors that we have on board, but if you know of any organizations who are looking to have exposure through the African Labour Law Society for their firms or their organizations, please reach out to me. My email address is in the chat, or it's on the African Labour Law Society website. We're very excited and very honoured to be able to take the conference to Mauritius. We had a very successful conference in October last year in Kenya, and that was our 4th conference. So we had good support, and we look forward to the support from all of you, either physically or online. So I'm not going to take up any more time because we are a bit over the time, but I'd like to just take this opportunity to thank our speakers and our moderator, Rethabile, and all her support of the people in Lesotho who have joined us this afternoon. I will be sharing the presentation with all of you just now, and look forward to any further engagement. Please look out for our calendar of webinars. We'll be having one in early February next year. So on behalf of the African Labour Law Society and LESLAW, the Lesotho Labour Law Society, thank you for your time. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for working hard. Thanks for engaging this afternoon, and have a very happy holiday season, and and we look forward to engaging in 2023. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you. And thank you to all participants for taking time to attend this webinar. Look out for more that are coming up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you, Mauritius.
Thank you, Mayenzeke. Thank you very much.